of the things I say to people is, to my worldview, I hate when people stigmatize work in any way. To me, you want to have a dog walking business so you can write your novel? To my mind, you're equal to the CEO. I don't care what you do. I want you to do something that makes sense for you and lets you find your
Mm-hmm.
purpose and make enough income to pay the bills and you know and be satisfied.
Hello, everyone. This is Ron Roel. I'm your host of 45 Forward, where my mission is to help you make the second half of life even better than the first. For Mike Dwyer, it started when a friend asked him for help on a resume. A simple favor. But that small request turned into a calling, one that would help hundreds of seasoned professionals reimagine their careers, overcome age bias, and rediscover purpose in the next chapter. Today, Mike joins us to talk about how his company, Implana Career, is helping people fight back, not just against job loss, but against the idea that the best years of life and your career are behind you. So now let's meet our guest, Mike Dwyer. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ron.
So let's start with that iconic moment, and I know it's developed over the years in your mind in terms of how it's affected you. But let's talk about your decision to go with Implana from what you were doing, what you're still doing in part.
Well, thank you. Ron, you're not 20 years old either, and so for me, I mean, I think it's routine for people as they get through their different stages of life to have someone around them, friend, neighbor, family member, whatever, colleague, say, take a look at my resume. What do you see?
Mm-hmm.
And I think mostly we confine ourselves to language edits, sequencing, and stuff like that.
Right.
For whatever reason, maybe it's because I knew the particular person as a friend and had been a client previously. On this particular setting, a new set of circuits fired.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, I started finding myself saying, well, you're a strong middle manager. I wonder if you should stretch for an executive position.
Mm-hmm.
Or, what's kind of cool is what if, and the other thought I had at the time, what if you consolidated to be an absolutely exemplary line professional? I mean, you've managed analysts. You could be just like the picture book perfect one of those. So really what happened is kind of like a chessboard if you look at the difference between a regular chessboard and three-dimensional. This particular time when I looked, I found myself saying, what could be otherwise?
Hmm.
And then what happened there, a tiny bit on that one, but then kind of once the seed was planted, a lot of times when we look at people's skills, you say to yourself, or I'd suggest you look at a resume, because I do now.
Mm-hmm.
If I added a couple more tiles of skills, what would the mosaic look like then? Are there a couple of things that this picture, such that if we added this or that, you see the person being stronger, more vital, more valuable. So that's kind of the founding story, Ron.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so did you see something that was basically missing in the landscape, for older folks?
If you go back 15, 10, 5 years, if you look at each of
Mm-hmm.
those in chunks, somewhere back there, kind of year 10 to 5, the gig economy started showing up. If you've been in business long enough, how many times have you seen business cycles?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Money's freely available. There's no money available. You got to centralize everything. You got
Mm-hmm.
to
Right.
decentralize everything. Um, I remember when the sort of gig economy first showed up, we all had this sense
Right.
of, oh,
Right.
we're just serfs. We're lucky to get anything. And then enter COVID, and all of a sudden you get a signing bonus from McDonald's.
Right.
And now somewhere I have a slide, the pendulum swings again. And I think these are always overcorrections. Now what I have a slide I have a slide somewhere. What it is 25 headlines from the Wall Street Journal, a couple from The Economist, and a couple from the New York Times. But mostly we try to be really mainstream, right? Wall Street Journal and Economist. What they're saying is you don't job hop, you job hug. You hang on to what you have. You know, the day of the $160,000 software engineer is over. This one got a job at Chipotle. Um, and to me, I capture those to be realistic, not to be bleak or discouraging. But if I want to get our blood boiling. I want to have this sense of fight back, and but I want to put a positive spin on it. I think when we find ourselves exploring, looking what's possible, and in effect shopping for networking opportunities, interesting things to follow up, I just think that's a really healthy dynamic for us. But not one of enduring, but one of exploration.
Yeah, you talk about the notion of fighting back, and I think about, certainly there are lots of obstacles. I know people who, they try to look for jobs online, and the frustration of like, where does my resume go? It goes into a black hole, and in many cases, it seems like really no one is really reading it. Some bot is reading it and picking out keywords, and if you hit them, you might get an interview, maybe, maybe not. So it does sort of put a chip on a lot of people's shoulder, and you think about you talk about fighting back, which I like the notion that there's fight there, and I think about fighting forward like as opposed to back. So what, and I think there is a lot of opportunity, but you have to really think it through. There it's a different environment, and yet at the same time, I think I saw a note somewhere that I think it was from ARP that the biggest demographic for people who are starting new businesses is 75 and older. So we're not giving up. So what are but what are the biggest challenges that you see facing older people now?
Lately in the business press, again, Wall Street Journal economist, solid mainstream sources. The latest is that the employers are complaining that candidates are sprucing up using AI. So we have a complete ridiculous board game. The candidates are using AI to embellish, in fact, you can be ugly clever at that stuff. One of the things I read about is somebody putting in a white font that is invisible to a human reader that says, you know, a message to the bot. And sometimes they apparently make a little bit of difference in the weighting. So, you got candidates. I've got MBA students. I work with a local university career office, job shadowing and mentoring and stuff. I've had an MBA spread different versions of a cover letter across a table at the co-working space and say, yeah, this one has these keywords, this one has that. So anyways, where I'm going with all this, I wouldn't say turn off the spigot, spend no time on the classic cover letter and resume. What I would say is don't bet the farm on it. And I think there's another thing that's attached to it. This was for a younger person, but I think this applies to an older one as well. Again, this is an MBA, a highly sophisticated person. They had sent 200 cover letters, but basically it was the same cover letter. And what I realized is I led this person through looking at different things, different companies I was familiar with in their sector. And the noise I wanted to hear, Ron, that human sound we make when we say, huh, that's intriguing. That looks kind of possible. And really, what I want people to do is, I don't say, give up on the Indeed application or whatever else is out there or the cover, but I want you to have done enough research where the cover letter writes itself. If you're excited enough about a company um, that you can say, oh my goodness, here's why I like what you're doing. Hey, here's why I think I fit into this. That is a completely different scenario than just being the 199th version of the aforementioned example.
Yeah, well, it does require, a variety of strategies, a certain sense of, um, well, realism, but also, a little chip on your shoulder. You're going to do this. And people, and now the good part of it is we have options. As we get older, we can retire if we want to. We can rewire if we want to. And it's a complex landscape. So there are lots of options, but lots of things we have to think about, and lots of opportunities that we may not have thought about. One of the things I liked about in reading about your approach And by the way, what does Implana have a certain meaning to the word? Is it?
It does. The name of the company is Career Collaboration LLC. But after I lived with that for a couple of months, first of all, nobody can spell it. Then it turns out there's a thing called the Career Collaborative, which is a nonprofit. And so I went, and you want to know what a nerd I am. I went and bought a Latin dictionary and tried cogito and this and that. And then I put that aside and said, you know what? I want empowerment. I want employment. I want a plan. Emplan. And one day I sounded out, and it turns out that was available as a trademark, as a domain, etc.
Okay, so it's about empowerment and employment and planning. Uh-huh. Yeah, good. I like that. Um, supposing I think the one of the things I think psychologically, about you're as we shift in our older years is okay, I'm going to be starting over, as opposed to So how do you help people not just think about starting over, but move forward, starting from here to a different place? But you're not just like, okay, here we go again.
I'm going to answer that question with a few examples and invite you for a few more, and we shall brainstorm, Mr. Ron. Um, one of the things you want to do is, I think a job can be compared to a molecule, and I think you want to look at some of the atoms that are in the mix. What's something I can break off? Um, do I know how to write requests for proposals? Have I done event planning? It turns out along the way in a long career, and so I very much encourage people to take a finite amount of time, no rabbit holes, no getting lost on the internet, but look through some old company notes, emails, contact lists, and what you're looking for is to be reminded of things you've done, companies that stirred the passion, people that you admire and might want to get in touch with, and that creates a dynamic. Another thing I think about us older folks, the seniors with the experience, I want to try a little thought example on you. Again, I'm going to use the request for proposal. I think most of your listeners will be familiar with that, right? Because in a, think public sector, if the town of whatever wants to get yellow lines painted on the parking lot, they have to put that out to bid or tender. And so you write something and you figure out what the scoring is and so on. Well, if you're looking for a blend of services to modernize a department or provide a multi-million-dollar system, writing that RFP becomes much more complex. So now I'm going to take this. This will be my second example before I ask you for some examples. So one of the things I want people to think about is, how many seats at the table have you had in this given endeavor? And let me give you an example. I'm very familiar with the RFP space. If you can say to me, I've written 100 of those. I've developed scoring mechanisms. I've posted them on public sector websites. I've done them through the state procurement portal. Okay, you've ticked a seat at the table. You've done one of them. Now, if you can say, oh, I worked for Ernst & Young and Deloitte, I probably have answered 100 proposals and won a fair, nobody has 1,000% batting average, but I've won a ton of them. We've had business. Well, that's a second seat at the table, isn't it? And a third seat at the table would be, I've received proposals. It's hard work, by the way. I did this in February. I and a colleague went through 29 vendor proposals for cybersecurity work. I mean, you really test that scoring mechanism you come up with. You got to really be thoughtful and this. And then the final seat at the table is, have you delivered work against that? So for your listeners, when they're looking back across their career, this is something I've been really focused, two things I've been focusing on lately, seats at the table that really let you know whether you have an offering. Because if you've covered several of those roles within a process or a typical activity, I think you've got a story. We'll get to another thing I've been working on. So any examples come to your mind, Ron, of looking through the nuggets, looking retrospectively for what you might bring forward?
Yeah, I mean, I do have some thoughts about that, and the main thing is, in looking, and as I've been working on my podcast, been looking back over like my evolution to this position and to this situation, and I look at a lot of the different projects that I've done. And one of the things is looking for a consistency of behavior, of action. So, I look at things and I look for, well, what did I actually do? What are the things I did? Not what are the things I thought or, pined about, but what did I actually do? What steps did I take? And it's focusing on your actions that sort of determine what it is it's really on your mind, what you can do, and what you actually, put your mind to doing. So that was my realization about, what look at what you actually did.
I love it. I love it. And one of the things I'll say is somebody, in many lives, probably not unlike yourself. I think I've read 1,000 resumes in my career. And one of the things that shapes up is you find yourself, is this person a spectator? I did on this, I was part of this, or the person I'm looking for. Now, to your point about action, show me somebody who said, yeah, customer problems got escalated to me. I want to talk to that person because that's a useful set of wheels. That person has, that's sort of they've done the hard work. They're used to being in the, in challenging positions. So to your point about action, I want to touch on community before we finish any of these. So now or soon, let's talk about that a little bit. You okay for that?
Yeah, I wanted to transition to that because one of the things that you and I have talked about is that in developing a community, a lot of us face what we don't really want to admit, but we're still kind of loners and we're kind of introverts. And so, how do you deal with developing a community when you feel you're an introvert, and how can you use that to to your advantage?
Um, there's a wonderful woman named Karen Wickery who is a living example of expertise in networking. She wrote a book, and the first version of it, the subtitle was The Secret Power of Introverts. We Like to Listen. So this lady, I go to the Wired magazine, pretty hot, upbeat magazine. I go to their 25th anniversary out in San Francisco 6 or 8 years ago, and it's got, you know, let's go to see their Museum of Modern Art because they use tech really well. I sat 50 feet away from every CEO in Silicon Valley. It's pretty cool. So this woman, Karen Wickery, talks about networking and how listening is such a superpower. After the her talk, I approached her, and I got to tell you, Ron, she looked at me like there was no one else on earth. Spent 10 minutes with me. No agenda, no need to jump in unless I wanted. I asked something, and what a great lesson in demeanor, focus, and boy, you know Steve Dubin, who introduced you and I. He and I have done. I hope you realize he and I have actually delivered a networking seminar. One time in Providence, one time in Massachusetts, um, and really, I think we work well together. And one of the things that comes across in that stuff isn't transactional. You don't say to someone, I know an interesting article, so you should introduce me to someone. It's not like that. It's, you know what, I'm curious about what you do, or boy, I'd like to know more about that. And when you're doing those things, I think that's the entree to the community. But I do have a technique to offer as well. A lot of the business press will talk about a personal board. And boy, have I done a lot of work on that. And one of the things I did a number of years back, the first time I did it was, I actually convened such a board. And when you get somebody who knows the person, the sector, careers, and you get them in a room with some bagels or coffee or something, it is marvelous. I mean, you can orchestrate that no matter how shy you are. Um, and also, in the sense of you mentioned your psychological state. When you're shopping, when you're saying, I really do want to get in touch with that old professor. Could I get a Zoom call? This person, I've always admired him. If you put a group together for a 45-minute conversation and you bring them a couple of questions, one of the technique things Steve Dubin and I will say is, don't do a big ask. Don't say, get me a job. Say, what's emerging? What should I be studying? that, if you picture a group you admire taking a little bit of time and addressing those kinds of questions, I think you can imagine how interesting and useful that becomes.
Yeah, I think that that's an approach that people, don't think about it. Like seriously, what interests me? And I call let me call Mike and say, Mike, I'm really interested in this. Can you spend 15 minutes with me talking about what this is about? So I guess there are various ways to describe it: topical interviewing or topical networking. But I think that people underestimate that if you're truly interested in something and you come across to someone and say, I'd love to talk to you about this, and then part two, as you point out, is the active listening. You're really listening to what they have to say, and they can tell there's an authenticity to that. Um, I recently had a woman on my show, Diane Hessen, who wrote this book called Our Common Ground, and she's a marketing expert, but she got involved in political marketing and finding out, um, why voters vote for certain ways for certain candidates and why they'd vote against certain candidates. And one of the things she pointed out was this notion of active listening. And when she talked to these voters, because, part of the issue as well, they'll tell you anything. Yeah, I voted for Mike, I voted for Joe. And so how do you know what they really think? And she said, if you're really actively listening to them and they know that, they will tell you, they will be honest with you and tell you what's really on their mind. So I think that's a really key aspect of it. And people also talk about, what do you mean active listening? And it really is that openness, right? That I'm not looking at you, I'm not thinking what I'm going to say, I'm not judging you, I'm just listening to what you have to say without judgment or expectation.
I love it. And thank you, Ron. I've been working on, you mentioned topical networking. I've been working on that recently as how do you combine a skills tune up, tweak, or exploration with this need to bypass the bots and look in somebody's eyes. And so for me, I've settled on the terminology that when I want to know a skill, I could take a course on LinkedIn or this, that. And I have done courses. I did an AI course at MIT Sloan just because I wanted, I actually spent some money just because I wanted really top quality guidance on this. But but that was a network situation, was a group, kind of thing. But I believe if you have a choice between taking a course in something on LinkedIn, or as Steve Dubin finished my sentence, driving 80 miles to an actual meetup of people who are interested in this topic, sector, development, that's a really interesting opportunity because you're going to have that chance to do that active listening and to make an impression and to get some guidance that maybe you find out that
Mm-hmm.
what you want to do needs more preparation than you realized. Okay, that doesn't mean you give up. It means, all right, now I know what I need to do. And maybe you do a different plan. One of the things I say to people is, to my worldview, I hate when people stigmatize work in any way. To me, you want to have a dog walking business so you can write your novel. To my mind, you're equal to the CEO. I don't care what you do. I want you to do something that makes sense for you and lets you find your
Mm-hmm.
purpose and make enough income to pay the bills and you know and be satisfied.
Well, you have a very interesting notion about networking, some of this topical networking. But one of the things that we have talked about, I wanted to expand about here, is what you do with your folks at the Cambridge Innovation Center. Um, it's so. I'll just draw an analogy of when I go out. One of my hobbies is bird watching. So you can go out and you can look for birds. You could go into search and go here and go there and jump to place and looking for birds. Or you can just go to one place that is a fertile area for exploring birds. Say just a feeding area, Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
water, a pond or watering hole, and wait for them to come to you and be there and observe. And it seems to me that you use these two approaches, and one of them is the innovation center where you just have people there that your folks can interact with. So tell us how you've set this up.
Well, that's right. For me personally, it's just I needed some office space, and co-working spaces make a lot of sense. And I think Cambridge Innovation Center is an unusually good one. I mean, it's a good value and so on. But there's 300 companies. I mean, sometimes when remember I mentioned I do some job shadowing. Usually in a job shadow, what the idea is you introduce them to accounting, underwriting. It's all good, but I cheat. I look through this 300 companies on 5 different floors at the Cambridge Innovation Center, Boston. And so my thing is, okay, who's it going to be today? And I've had some absolutely delightful things, where you bring international students, bring U.S. students, and have them meet an insurance tech platform company, a nonprofit, this, that, the other. So one of the secrets, I think, Ron, is venue. Um, Going to the coffee shop and getting on a Zoom and talking to a few people, that's all fine, good. But going someplace where you can get something lively and new, that's worth it. And I also, as again, Steve and I have, and I've developed something that Steve and I have delivered. One of the things we realized is that for those of us later in life who maybe some of us have figured out that we're either extroverts or our curiosity outweighs our shyness. So whatever it might be, I end up just when I go someplace with 50 new people, I end up making at least 4 friends. And if somebody's not going great or whatever else, good luck. It's okay. On to the next. But what do you do if you're really shy? If this is really new to you, do something scripted. Somewhere in my materials, I have a little table. And on one of the table is the orchestrated session. This is easy to navigate. So if you go to a lecture with a Q&A afterwards, you're all set because you sit there for the first 45 minutes and then you have free conversation fodder, right? You got the lecture you just saw. So you really don't need a lot of navigation, creativity, or boldness to do that. And if you're new to getting out there, look for those kind of softball venues. Then you move up the food chain a little bit that says, hey, this incubator hub's having an open house. I'll tell you, every once in a while, it's been a few years now, but every once in a while, you ever go to a shootout? I went to one, a shootout being, here's several early stage companies that are pitching. They get so many minutes each, few slides, and they get to throw their pitch at the audience. And I mean, if that doesn't get your blood going and thinking, who knew you could even do that as a business type thing? And then you go all the way up to where I know in the Cambridge Innovation Center, the one over at Kendall Square, there's 2 locations. Every Thursday night, they have something called Venture Cafe. And that is for the amped up people. That's caffeinated. So I would say to somebody who's shy and doesn't do a lot of networking, don't start with that. That's going to be high powered, and you got to know how to engage, disengage, move around. But I hope in front of you, I've taken some of your points and use it to seed this idea of, what would it look like if I want to ease into it? What would it look like if it's a little bit more complex and requires some navigation, a little bit more personal effort or prep or whatever, all the way to the free for all, right? The 300-person event at Venture Cafe where, oh my God, there's founders and service providers and everybody knows what they're doing.
There are situations where you realize, you know what, what's to lose here? I think that comes with a certain amount of experience and maturity. You just realize, hey, this works, fine. If it doesn't, it's okay. Move on. So you're manage your ego a little bit better in terms of things working or not working, or people recognizing you or not. And I think that comes as as I think you're older and have gone through this a number of times. That there are also just when you put yourself in venues like that, so you put yourself in an environment where you allow your curiosity to sort of wander and just meet people, and you're not looking for something specific. You're just looking for people who have done things and can, stimulate you and excite you and perhaps tease things out that you hadn't looked at. So I think just putting yourself in environments. I mean, you could find certain networking events that are typical of things that you've already done in your professional network, but finding some networks where you're not really in the center of it. You're in a new place. But again, if you address it with the attitude of let's see what happens. Let's see what that something complete. And now for something completely different.
I really like that. And, you do make me think of something else, which is sometimes there's this concept of the informational interview where it's not a tiny ask, but it's not a huge one either. You say to someone who you know that has a feel for a sector or, works at the kind of company you're interested in. And I went to grad school at Salve Regina University in Newport, and it's a real teaching college. I mean, no one's ever going to say, "How'd you get into Salve?" I mean, I'm sure they have good standards and everything, but they're such a teaching school. Well, one of the persons at the career office now has really been doing some great writing on informational interviews, and that this it's low risk. So one of the things I'd say to you, Ron, you can even let me offer you. Let me grab. Let me. You make me want to share a technique. So first, we're going to take Ron's spirit. What do you have to lose? Then we're going to organize it in Mike's way. If you've got a leading light, practice on a regular light. In other words, if you want to go after somebody who you actually think, wow, am I going to make a good impression? This is a very high-powered person. Find a place to practice so that it's even safer. You know what I mean? Find a, a, a friend who may not be in management or an entrepreneur, but is in the sector, and learn a little bit and give it a sense, right? So it makes sense. Just really expanding on your point, that use your maturity to your advantage. You should have your ego under control by this point. um, and understand you don't need to be the only one talking, and they're really getting out there and trying something. It's okay if it works, great, and if it doesn't, on to the next.
So you have lots of ideas, and I know that you've. I just want to talk a little bit about how you organize them and put them together in your career workbook and toolkit. So talk about that a little bit, just so people can know that there's something to follow up. There's a call to action where they can talk to you and get more information about how to do this.
Well, thank you so much, Ron. And I really can reassure. There's really no heavy sales and arm twisting here. I'm kind of equal. If somebody wants to leave a submittal form on Implana Career and we have a chat, great. But if somebody just wants to pick up on how to do this and give it a try themselves and with some friends that form that personal board, that's a great outcome too. So one of the things I do is we want to make sure that we don't go down in the internet. You can go down rabbit holes and you can start exploring something, and next thing you know, it's 6 p.m. and your spouse is saying, "What are you doing?" You know what I mean? Or, "I need to go to bed." I try and break this into a 5-day program, and during the course of that program, at the early part of it on Monday, it's really retrospective and internal. All the things we talked about earlier that say, "What have I done?" I love what you said about action. Where was it that I can say, "No, I was, I was out there in the middle of the intersection on those. I wasn't on the sidelines." Um, we're looking for things we've done, interesting directions, companies, things you've always meant to follow up on, people. Then what you do is you start to sort that out. You do a little bit. By the second day, you want to do some assessment, and especially for us seniors. I don't mean to have any attitude or that. Don't worry, my ego fits in my pocket at this point. I never left. So I've been doing generations of technology from mainframe to AI. I work on cloud computing, cybersecurity. So one of the things I want to help with seniors. Okay, let's do a little bit of a diagnostic and assessment here. And this is what you're moving into in day two. Are, are you a heavyweight in your sector? Do you know the emerging issues and all kinds of the compliance things that are happening? Who's the major competitors? If not, learn some more. Um, I break it into three parts: tech, business, and sector. I once had an MBA that I had hired as a grad student who I just admired. This person was an MBA in disruptive models in business and stuff like that, something along that line. And one time we decided to have a free form conversation and go around the table and say, what matters? And she said, oh, execution, project management. Now, this is from an MBA who studies the entrepreneurial spirit and disruptive business models. And she's saying you got to know how to execute. That's really, that shows you something. So if you have a sense of your sector, if you're always strengthening your business skills, project management, communication. Now, tech, if I think some of our seniors are unnecessarily afraid of one thing that has to be straightforward is collaboration tools. In today's world, in the last week, I've been on Teams, Google Meet, you know, this, that, the other. The people next to me use Slack. And, you know, rather, one thing, don't read an article. Download it, find a friend, and organize a golf tournament on one of these things, or a birthday party, or, you know, what did you say, action? Um, Go from what is this to, my first sense of it is that is such a different story. And I really exhort people to go at these things and take a fresh look. If they need help, get their personal board, get Implana, whatever. But look at your business skills, look at your sector skills, and look at your tech skills, and look and see what needs, if anything needs doing. And if it does, you can act on it. It's feasible today.
I think looking at those three are I think are really good guidelines. I think one of the things that invariably does you know terrorize us sometimes is the tech aspect, and now of course AI is all over the place, and I think unfortunately it's so pervasive that it's um, it, look, it has tremendous opportunity, but it's so varied that you have to sort of figure out how you want to use it, and also um, I want to get your thoughts on how to think forward in terms of, because I think this is where people look at the future of work and they're like, oh my God, we're all going to be taking over our jobs, and then, we're going to be answering to robots. What do you say to someone who is anxious about the future of work?
Well, I think um, somewhere I have a slide called range of outcomes. And whether that's I'm going to offer some little thing on a freelance platform, I'm going to start something, or I know the job I really want, that's some great work to be doing. And I think that the answer to I think the answer to that problem is intersections. If you say, I saw a great LinkedIn post a few months ago that said, if you know data analytics, learn storytelling. You know, a person at my co-working space who I greatly admired was corrected me. She said, Mike, at a recent conference, they didn't call them soft skills; they call them durable skills. I'm in love with that. So, your ability to communicate. One of the things about us seniors, and one of the things I do talk to people about, and why you need a personal board and a little bit of pushback is make sure you're not telling war stories. You know, um, use your experience to use your experience to watch, to know what to watch for, and how to help, not to harangue someone on how it used to be. And that's a specific discipline and technique. And especially if you've been out of the workforce, Dubin, I really like working with him. He wrote this great intro to some article he wrote that said, "So, you got really good at pickleball. You caught up on all the episodes on BritBox, and then you said, what do I really want to do?" And if you've been out of the workforce a little while, and I'll tell you, personal experience, if people have been out of the work cadence for more than 90 days, I can tell almost. There's, there's a chance to treat it all as a conversation as opposed to answering the question and keeping the action moving in the meeting, right? In today's world, a lot of people, there's a methodology in software development called Agile. And one of the things they do is they have a 10-minute stand-up meeting. Man, why do you stand up? Because we're going to keep this short. And you're meant to say, okay, next, or here's the issue I hit. Um, and you want to be able to play in that. You want to be able, and there is another piece of advice that I want to throw at people. If you see a very young person who's two management levels up, your first reaction can't be, I wonder if they're competent. Don't make that mistake. Um, I was having not a challenging conversation, but an exploratory conversation with someone at City Hall Boston, and the person was leading a session and they were doing really great. So at the break, I said, "Are you an MPA, Master of Public Administration, or an MPP, Master of Public Policy?" She said, "Both." This is a highly educated, effective person who's been doing process improvement workshops for 10 years. She might look like a 30-year-old, but if you're coming back to this work, you need to have your mind ready, no wandering, no harangues, and understand that this person knows what they're trying to do, and your job is to figure out how to help and to do what you're asked to do. Not, not to say, well, wait a minute, I've been doing this for so long. Fair enough, makes sense.
I think that this is an issue. A lot of people coming back worry about, yeah, how do you interact with somebody who's younger than you are and yet at a higher position? And I think I think you need to sort of throw that out.
I do, Ron, and you know what? When you do enough of this work, you actually start realizing, well, wait a minute, I got an idea, I got a technique. If you have to, don't look at the person, just listen to what they're saying, and ignore the word like, right? Because you know how we talk these days. It's like if I kind of like wanted to like just listen to what is being said and look for what that reveals in terms of what needs doing, what's happening around you, how to collaborate. Make sense?
Yeah. So this has been great. So listen, if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do it?
Thank you. We just go on the website. There's a little submit form. Um, Me and I do have an intern, and I'm going to be hiring a grad student. But we have day jobs so that we know what to tell you in this career work. Probably takes a day or so to get back, but we will. And I have no trouble, by the way, Ron. A 45-minute call, first consult always free, and a lot of times that's all people need. So feel free to get on Implana. But I was lucky enough to do, I'm so pleased at doing these podcasts. I have to tell you, I am so impressed at the amount of work that you hosts do and the care you have for your audience. That's the that's the impression I have so far. So, anyways, if it's one of the hosts said, "Well, Mike, maybe instead of getting in touch with you, they just listen to this podcast twice," and I said, "I love it. Do that." That's
Why either or? Do both. Yeah, you provide a lot of interesting information, and so Implana, EMPLANA career.com, and the best way just to email you, Mike Dwyer at Implana.
There's a little contact form in the website that goes to an orderly place where one of us will be sure to see it, and that's the best way. And then we'll be sure and follow up and see if we need a chat or what to arrange. Do you know one other thing I miss doing that I'm trying to get organized again is doing some seminars, not one on one, but small group. So I guess what I'd say, if any of your listeners have neighbors or friends, and three or four to six of you want to get together, let me talk to you about how that can work. And you can even do that as your personal board too. What we do in that space is just come up with maybe 3 slides, right? Maybe that headline slide that shows all the doom and gloom about the employment sector, or maybe a slide that shows um, tech, business, and sector levels of expertise. Just something that prompts discussion. Then you know what the model is? Go around the table, everybody gets 1 minute. Even me, the organizer. I get my 1 minute to show my slide. Ron gets a minute, and you can pass or you can say something. And the survey monkey to that kind of model has been really positive because it flies by in terms of time. We all get to hear from each other. But I guess what I'd say is, above all, don't do this solo. Find that personal board, network. Um, don't try and be the Marlboro man, so to speak. No.
Yeah, there's help out there and use it. Ask for help. Excellent. Okay. So, folks, you can see Mike, hear him on my 45 Forward podcast, which you can go to my archive, 45forward.org, and you can listen to Mike again, listen twice. And also, you can see all my other shows and see what I've been doing. And if you want to know more about me, you could email me at ron@45forward.org. You can sign up for my newsletter, which I send out once a month. So just email me asking to subscribe. And when you listen to the podcast, make a comment. Say something to Mike about what you thought and what you can contribute to the conversation, and subscribe to the podcast. So until then, folks, until the next episode next week, keep moving forward. 45 Forward.